Welcome to Iona College. I'm Dr. Elena Percario-Foley. I am the Director of Jewish Catholic Studies here. This is our 20th year of the Shared Roots Divergent Path series with the American Jewish Committee. We're very proud of our program, and we have a program once a semester. So we really value our partnership.
We're very pleased to be bringing such a timely and important discussion to this region. It comes on the heels of the environmental catastrophe caused by the recent fires in Australia and in the throes of the attacks on U.S. bedrock environmental laws such as the Endangered Species Act, the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the National Environmental Policy Act, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. The Catholic academic who will speak tonight is Sister Kathleen Degnan, and the Jewish speaker is Rabbi Nina Beth Carden. Their full bios are in your program, but I'll highlight a few things. Rabbi Carden, who joins us from Baltimore, Maryland, is fondly known as the Green Rabbi. She works at the intersection of faith and sustainability. Rabbi Carden founded the Baltimore Orchard Project, Maryland's Environmental Rights Amendment movement, and serves on the board of Waterkeepers Chesapeake, a coalition of 18 independent programs working to maintain and restore the health of the waters and communities of the Chesapeake and coastal bays. She has planted 8 fruit trees on her lawn, a gesture of hope for her children and grandchildren. Sister Kathleen Degnan is Professor Sister Kathleen Degnan is Professor of Religious Studies here at Iona College. Her interests are in the areas of classical and contemporary spirituality with a focus on creation theology and spirituality. Her work is devoted to transmitting the spiritual and intellectual legacies of Thomas Merton and her mentor Thomas Berry in a variety of academic, artistic, and pastoral formats. A Green Faith Fellow, Dr. Degnan completed a 2-year postdoctoral training for religious environmental leadership. The newly inaugurated Sister Degnan Institute for Earth and Spirit at Iona College serves the emergence of an ecological civilization to revive and protect our common home through transformative environmental education, spiritual animation, and creative celebration. Thank you all so much for coming tonight, and I look forward to talking with you after what I am sure will be a fascinating and timely program.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming this evening. As we just heard, I've had the wonderful fortune of being a Green Faith Fellow, taking training through that particular initiative for religious environmental leadership. And this evening, I would like to have our sharing of wisdom for this earth be a way to bow to and to honor Rabbi Lawrence Troster, an exceptional Jewish environmental theologian who was for many, many years the rabbi in residence here at Iona College for the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue. To the heartbreak of many of us, he passed last year, not long after he actually sat on this very stage to share his wisdom with us. And I would just want to offer up all the insight and wisdom that somehow has come from him to me. I'd like to do that in his honor tonight. Thank you.
Every society is built on and runs on myth, not things that are not true, but myth as anthropologists understand them. Myths are the sacred stories, the narratives, the things that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and sometimes not even consciously, the things that culture tells us about us and the culture itself. And we build our values and our behaviors on such myths. I had a professor at the seminary, Rabbi Neil Gilman, who said, first of all, let people know that myths are not things that are false or true in the sense of historically, logically true, but they are true in the sense of mining the wisdom of a people and a culture and the ways that people think. So every culture has myth, and he would say, let them know that it's not yes myth or no myth, but which myth? What kind of myth does your society run on? And people of faith imagine that our myth is our sacred narrative, the stories that we grew up with, the stories we tell our children, the stories that guide our behavior and guide our beliefs. So the question is, what is the sacred myth of human relationship to the earth in the faith communities? What is the way in my tradition that Judaism says we are to be in relationship with the earth? And the fact is that while Judaism was founded as a landed nation and a landed people, what is the first commandment to Abraham in the Bible? Lech lecha, get up from this land and go to that land. Somehow you can't be a people unless you go to that land. Even though we are a landed people and we have agricultural laws in the Bible about how you're supposed to treat the land, and even though that the Bible itself starts not with Abraham, or as the rabbis say, why doesn't the Bible start with the Exodus, which is actually the beginning of the birth of the nation of the Jewish people? Why does the Bible start with Bereshit, with creation? Right? The Bible starts with creation, the universal creation for all humanity. Why does it do that? Because the Bible clearly has something very powerful to say about humans, all humans' relationship to the land. But because Jews had been exiled for 2,000 years, I think we lost a bit of our relationship, a bit of our sense of needing to understand the sacred relationship that we have to the land. We have bits and pieces of people talking about that over the 2,000 years, but our relationship to the land was not as well developed as some other aspects of Judaism, like how do you observe Shabbat, the Sabbath? How do you observe kashrut, the dietary laws? Even how do you do business ethically? And it is now, for all the reasons that you heard, thanking AJC in your introductions, all the reasons that you heard, that Judaism, along with the rest of the world, is turning its attention to its tradition to learn about that sacred myth. What does Judaism have to tell us about humanity's relationship to the earth? And I want to begin with two quotes. First, from Leviticus. In case you wonder, who does the earth belong to? Leviticus says, the land must not be sold beyond reclaim. That is, it's talking about if you own a piece of property and you sell it, in fact, you have to understand you never owned the property in the first place, and you can't really permanently sell it in the second place. All you can do is possess this land now, and then when you sell it, all you can do is sell it for the remaining number of years until the Jubilee, when the land has to go back to the original owners. So this is what it's talking about. The land must not be sold beyond reclaim because the land is mine. The land belongs to God. None of us made this earth. Right? None of us toiled to make this earth. None of us can claim rights to this earth beyond all other generations and all others who live here. We all have the same rights and claims to a healthy earth and all the resources that the earth can provide. And why, in part? Not only did God make this and we didn't, but because we are transients. As God says, you are but sojourners residing here with me. And because we're transient, we can't claim permanent ownership and rights to all of the resources of the earth and deny others who come after us or even our neighbors those resources to the earth. So first thing we have to understand, the land belongs to God, and we are transients, and we are privileged and blessed to use the earth, but we cannot claim it as ours and do with it anything that we wish. And second of all, Isaiah. This is the fundamental, I believe, the fundamental ethic of Jews and land. And it's right here, buried somewhere deep in Isaiah. The creator of the heavens, he is God, and the one who fashions the earth and makes it. He is the one who establishes it. He did not create it to be chaos, but he fashioned it to be inhabited. So on the one hand, we have to understand that the earth is not ours, it belongs to God. On the other hand, why in the world did God create the earth? So that we can inhabit it. The earth is there for us to use, to create dignified lives in, to revel in, to be awe-inspired by. God created the earth, and the only reason that we understand that God created the earth, in part, is for us to inhabit it in health and wholeness and dignity. So those are sort of the fundamental ways to understand this very basic ethic of land and our relationship to it. Now, if we're supposed to inhabit the earth, the question then becomes, well, how do we best do that? How do we best use the earth? So we go and we start with the very beginning of the book of Genesis, because the book of Genesis tells us that God created the earth and then has humans be in that creation. And what I want to posit to you is that we have two creation stories in the beginning of Genesis. How many of you know the two creation stories? Yeah. Oh, good. I'm going to teach you a lot then today in the next 15 minutes. We have two creation stories in Genesis. There's Genesis 1 and there's Genesis 2. And I want to argue that Genesis 1, which is the 6 days of creation, the seventh day of the Sabbath, Genesis 1 has been the vision of how humans should be in relationship to the earth, and that often has been misunderstood. And that now we're in a Genesis 2 model of our relationship to the earth. So let me unpack that for you. Genesis 1 has the earth being created in 6 days. Each day builds upon the previous day, right? So we have light, and we have the separation of the heavens and the earth. We have the separations of the land and the water, and then we get the plants, and then we get the animals and the plants and the humans. And something very critical is hidden in this story. So read with me Genesis 1 and 11 and 12. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, seed-bearing plant, fruit trees of every kind on earth that bear fruit with the seed in it." And it was so. And the earth brought forth vegetation, seed-bearing plants of every kind, and trees of every kind bearing fruit with the seed in it. And God saw that it was so. One thing you have to know about the Bible, it doesn't repeat words when it doesn't have to. There's a word that's repeated in here, several words that's repeated in here over and over again. What are those words? Seeds. Seeds. When God made this earth, according to Genesis 1, when God made this earth was self-regenerative. It was self-sustaining. God made it in a way that without us needing to do anything, and as long as we don't mess it up, the earth will sustain itself. It has the seeds within it from generation to generation. It will renew itself. And when humans were created, what did God say about the humans? God made them in the image of God. He created them, male and female. He created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase and fill the earth and master it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on this earth." What is humans' responsibility and task in this Genesis 1 creation story? Yeah, reproduce, multiply, and there seems to be a limitless approach that we have to the earth. Right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, right? Dominate the earth. Why? Why? Because we were vulnerable. We had high vulnerability and a very small footprint, right? At that time, imagine two naked people coming into this vast earth, not even knowing how to eat, how to keep warm. There's a wonderful rabbinic midrash that has Adam and Eve being born, enjoying the first day, and then witnessing the sunset. And they thought it was the end of the world. The sun was setting, it became dark, and they thought that was it. Life was already over and destruction was coming, until the sun came up the next day. That's how vulnerable Adam and Eve were, imagining, right? That's how vulnerable they were. They had no protection against disease, against wild animals, against the cold, against the heat. Of course, Adam and Eve, the first man and the first woman, of course they needed to be able to dominate the world around them, because they needed to be able to build protection, build shelter, get clothing, be able to manage, figure out what foods they should have. So in Genesis 1, which is a self-regenerating world, and Adam and Eve were there as vulnerable, they were blessed with this commandment of dominating their physical environment, because otherwise they would not survive. The problem is we have been living with this kind of land ethic, this domination of land ethic in the modern world. We needed this for the first 10,000 years in which humanity existed in the modern world. We needed this in order to survive. But once we created a technological world, once we created our capacity to be, as E.O. Wilson says, geophysical forces in and of ourselves, we can no longer live according to this world. There is no longer a self-sustaining world by itself, because we are interfering with it. And we can no longer be those human beings who have a limitless approach to the world, using the world as resources, as a commodity, at whatever way we want, because we have become a greater power than Adam and Eve, the first man, the first woman, ever were. So if this first story is no longer the applicable myth that can drive us, what is? Genesis 2. Genesis 2 is a radically different creation story. Genesis 2 says, when the Lord God made earth and heaven, no shrub of the field was yet on earth, and no grasses of the field had yet sprouted, because the Lord had not set rain upon the earth yet. So this is a radically different story. It's not a sequential approach with every aspect of life giving birth to the next level of life. Rather, God wanted to create an earth, but it was barren because two things were missing. Two things were missing. What were they? Rain and humanity. In the first creation story, humanity was like the telos, the fullness of creation, right? Everything was created up until the point where humans could come into the world and benefit from everything that was there, right? And they had a limitless ability to benefit from what was there. That's Genesis 1. Genesis 2 says God wants an earth, but the earth can't come into being, can't come into the fullness until humanity is created. So what does God do? God creates humanity. And then what does he do? The Lord God formed man of the dust of the earth, no longer just in God's image, but from the dust of the earth. And God blew into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And then the Lord took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to till it and to tend it. In this story, humanity is made for the purpose of creating earth. In Genesis 1, the earth is created for the purpose of supporting man. It's a radically different approach, and I want to suggest that in our world, when we are so powerful, when the humans are no longer so vulnerable, although we still remain vulnerable, but are no longer so vulnerable, and that we have tremendous power, that we have such technological power and such technological reach, and we can upset the very operating systems of this globe, that we no longer can live a Genesis 1 model, but we have to live a Genesis 2 model, which imagines that we are there for the protection of the earth. One of my friends, Jeremy Benstein, says, okay, let's look at those words to till and to tend. They really, in Hebrew, are le'avda u'leshamra. Le'avda is to work the earth. The earth is there for us to use. But there's the second word, lishamra, which lovingly, to till and to tend is nice because it's alliterative, right? But lishamra really means to protect it. And he says, what do we have to protect the earth from? Right now, what exists? The earth and humanity. So what is it that we have to protect the earth from? And he says we have to protect the earth from us, overworking the earth. And that's exactly where we are today. We're in a system where, in fact, we have lived a Genesis 1 model of imagining the world always being self-regenerating, never having any problems doing that, being there at our beck and call so we can live in it in limitless fashion. And we should have been able to do that as we did for the first 10,000 years before the technological era. But now that we're in a new technological era, we have to live in a Genesis 2 model, where we understand that we are part of the community of Earth, and that we are there and we are here to protect the Earth, and not just use it mindlessly and limitlessly and thanklessly. So I wanted to provide you with that vision of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 models, the then model of Genesis 1, the now model of Genesis 2. So these are the sort of a glancing view of the two stories and how they differ. So Genesis 1 in Genesis 1, Earth is self-renewing and self-contained. Genesis 2, the Earth is dependent on us. Genesis 1, the world is wilderness. Genesis 2 is garden. Even the place of Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 and the earth have it different. In Genesis 1, human is in God's image. Genesis 2, the human is made from the earth. Genesis 1, human is sovereign, can do whatever they want, right? Genesis 2, the human is gardener and guardian. I hope you like that. I was very proud of that. Genesis 1, our relationship to the earth is extractive. We can survive because we can do with it what we need to live without limits. In Genesis 2, our relationship to earth is generative. Genesis 1, our consumption is limitless, although we couldn't eat meat, but we could specifically eat all the trees, all the trees. Genesis 2, there were some things that were off limits. There were limits. Genesis 1, our domain was all the earth, which means there could be no place we couldn't go. There could be no exile. Genesis 2, we're in the garden. If we ruin the garden, we will be in exile. Genesis 1, nature as commodity. Genesis 2, nature as community, something we should protect and preserve as well as use.
Thank you for that wonderful, concise, and clear, wonderful foundation for the conversation that we are continuing now. I can promise you that mine will not be that concise, but it may be clear. That's what I'm hoping. So I have to say that what Rabbi Nina has just presented to us is the perfect foundation for the conversation that I would like to introduce us to. Since we're here to share wisdom this evening, the Catholic community is recovering our own sense of our biblical vocation, our sacred vocation, to be the caretakers of earth. And it's just so interesting that you did this so brilliantly, the Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 models. Even Pope Francis, in his encyclical Laudato Si, does a clarification and rectification of Catholic teaching. You have heard it said once that we will fill the earth and have dominion. And so Francis wants to completely walk that back and give not a new teaching, but perhaps the deeper teaching of the Genesis 2 narrative, that we are stewards and caretakers. So this particular document that I'm sure you have all heard about, it is 5 years old now, which our relatively new Pope, Francis, offered us and inaugurated or initiated its development almost simultaneous to his election as Pope. He wanted a teaching that was clear and comprehensive and universal on the care of our common home. So I consider this an ancient magisterium, that is to say, an ancient teaching for a new age. The letter is actually not written to Catholics exclusively. It is written to everyone, everywhere. It is an invitation to reflection and action in this critical era of climate destruction And he says, I'd like to enter into dialogue with all the people about our common home. This is at the beginning of the text. He says, I urgently appeal then for a new dialogue about how we are shaping the future of our planet. As Rabbi Nina Beth was saying, it is our vocation and charge to be co-collaborators with the living one in the flourishing of this earth and of the universe. We need a conversation which includes everyone, since the environmental challenge we're all undergoing has its human roots and therefore concerns all of us. So I want to say that this document is almost like a new catechism. Though the catechism of the Catholic community is larger and broader and comprehends many other things, this particular catechism is the one that's so very urgent for our moment. I want to say that it is a catechism and a catechesis because it's bringing the Catholic community back into an appropriation of our, what I want to call, mystical teaching and moral teaching about the natural world. And it is a magisterial mandate. So why do I want to say something about a mystical teaching? Because this document really wants to, in its first and second chapters in particular, invite the people of faith everywhere, and Catholic Christians in particular, to recover a sense of profound intimacy in and with and through the living world with the mystery of divinity. And this is so faithful to our spiritual intuitions because we're the tribe that says the Word became flesh, that in some sense this creative dabar of the living one actually took on flesh. Now, we've always meant that to mean in the person of Jesus, but as our theology and even as our teacher Francis wants to say, this mystery of incarnation is the very, very first primordial mystery. It is the mystery of the flourishing, of the flaring forth of this divine life, which is still manifesting and is still flaring forth as the universe. But this is the matrix of the divine mystery itself. So in the words of this beautiful canticle, what are we talking about? The beautiful canticle, Laudato Si. The name of the document is the first line of a song that is attributed to Francis of Assisi, the 13th century Italian mystic, sometimes called Il Poverello, also the one whom you see on everybody's lawn, offering water to the birds. That was a joke. And the Francis, who is our creation master, the one who gives us this beautiful canticle about brother sun, sister moon, sister water, brother fire, our intimate relations with all beings. And it is, and of course, Bergoglio, who became Francis, took the name Francis explicitly and particularly to invoke Francis's blessing on his papacy, because he wanted it to be a new moment of recovery of our sense of wonder and sense of gratitude for the living planet. And so the words of the beautiful canticle, Francis reminds us that our common home is like a sister with whom we share life, and and it's also as if she is a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. And so Francis is actually challenging the Catholic community to become, and people of faith and people of conscience in general, to become a new cohort guiding the world toward sustainability in this most extreme moment of crisis that we are in. Guiding the world toward, this is aspirational, but an ecological age. And so the beautiful lyricism of Francis of Assisi's canticle of the creatures weaves itself through the document. What Francis, the Pope, wants to remind Catholic Christians is that we must develop for ourselves a thoroughgoing, integral ecology. That is to say, this is not simply a green encyclical, but rather this is a social encyclical, except now we are expanding the social order to the entire living world. It is, as I think Rabbi Nina's remarks suggested also, a critique of this excessive anthropocentrism that has guided our world toward this brink of chaos that we are in right now. Because we have not understood that we share this common home with all living kind and more, the mineral world, etc. So what this teacher is inviting us to is a concern for the environment that needs to be joined with a sincere love for our fellow human beings, an unwavering commitment to resolving the problems of society. There are no social problems that are not ecological problems. There are no ecological problems that do not become social problems. And so this unitive vision is what we're being called to. The document is also calling the Catholic Christian community to an awakening, a radical conversion experience. This is very powerful. It doesn't happen with the promulgation of a letter, an encyclical letter. It happens when there's this summons that this beautiful letter calls us to, and then there are years and decades and perhaps centuries of really, really responding to the summons to an ecological conversion, so that we might do what? So that we might hear the cry of the poor and the cry of the earth, or rather, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. So this is the axiom. This is the dialectical unity, you could say, of this document, is to comprehend that the cry of the earth is always going to be the cry of the poor. And we know this on a planet of such egregious wealth disparity. So this, by the way, in our tradition, our teaching develops. We belong to a community of faith in which teaching develops. Teaching is in creative tension with history, always. And it is the role and the obligation of our teachers to bring our faith into a radical contact with the signs of the times and the events of the age. And so for this particular Pope, he wants to say what has been written here is now part of the body of the Church's social teaching. And so we have in our community, our faith leans into the Scripture, or is derived from Scripture, shall we say. But even more so, I would argue that the Catholic faith draws from tradition, because we had traditions before we had our Scriptures. And now that we have made a compendium of our social teaching throughout the ages, and we call it the Catholic social teaching tradition. So The document itself has 6 chapters. The first is what is happening to our common home. And in this chapter, all of the writers of the document and all of the consultors, among whom were some of the finest environmental scientists on the planet, really give us a description of what is going on. The second chapter is a particularly beautiful one, I think. It's called The Gospel of Creation. And quite frankly, we don't hear this phrase or haven't heard it very often prior to this document. When we say gospel, of course, we mean good news. We almost always mean the gospel of Jesus. But again, Bergoglio, Francis, is going back to say the primordial gospel is the gospel of creation itself. It is the gospel of the living universe, which is the manifestation of God's creativity and wonder and splendor and mystery and terror and awe. The third chapter of this document wants to explore the human roots of the environmental crisis. And this, I think, is where the Catholic thinkers do some of their best work, because this is the place where they round everyone up who really, really understands the intersection of environment, economy, politics, culture, race, all of the multiples that somehow come together in the ways that human life is experienced, and also how Earth life is hurt or not, by trying to examine the human roots. And I think, Rabbi Nina, you did a brilliant job in giving us the lens to understand that through Genesis 1. Of course, we could unpack it and unpack it, which is what this document really tries to do. There's that word again. In the 4th chapter, the Pope wants to really teach us what is integral ecology and give us the capacity for this bifocal vision, really. Or I should say, bifocal audition, to hear the cry of the earth and to know it as the cry of the poor also. The 5th chapter of the document is an expose or an explication of various and multiple lines of action. How shall we be in this moment? What shall we do? Which I think is one of your slides, which is the great question. What shall we do? You and I, Rabbi Nina, we come from, if I may say, activist spiritualities. We are dedicated to history and to somehow to salvation, to the saving of the world and of human persons in the world. And so the Pope gives us some of these ways. The 6th chapter, which is the longest chapter, is the chapter on ecological spirituality and education. And this is a wonderful chapter. Some of my scholars are here tonight, some of the professors who have also brought students here tonight who may be studying Laudato Si. We at Iona have taken very, very seriously this challenge and charge, first of all, for us to become a Laudato University, but to have our curriculum deeply and radically influenced by the vision and the ethos of this document. It is a beginning. It is a summons. It is not the final curriculum. It is not the final word. It is actually the beginning word of years and decades and perhaps centuries of work. And I want to say that a particularly exciting thing that I think is happening, and it has been happening, by the way, it has to be said before Francis's encyclical, is that the spirituality of the Catholic community is getting earthy again. We have been a tradition that used to love to speak about heaven, and we spent most of our time wondering if we were going to heaven, and we didn't spend a lot of time wondering how we were enjoying heaven on earth, so to speak, the paradise that has been given of this planet, the garden that you spoke of. How shall we truly become what another marvelous teacher, Thomas Merton, has called, how do we become the gardeners and the governors of paradise? And how do we allow ourselves to live in the joy of being in communion with living kind? One of the things that we may bring up in our dialogue, I'd like to, because I think you bring it up too, I got to see all her slides, is that there is in this document from Francis a fierce technocratic critique. The critique and the warning that human beings are really we are risking the depth of our true human nature by the world that we have created and the civilization that we've created. And so the invitation now, through Laudato Si', is to come home. It's to come home to paradise, which is our common home here with one another. So, thank you.
Thank you so much for this first piece of the evening, and we will open it up right now.
It seems like it's the theological, maybe chapter, maybe cyclical.
The question was, what is the gospel of creation, and how is that a new phrase in theology?
Thank you. So the second chapter of Laudato is called the Gospel of Creation. And yes, it is filled with you could say a rehearsal of Catholic faith as it is inspired by the biblical word. Francis will go through the beautiful narrative of Genesis, which we also hold as our true and original story, and also reminds us that the biblical tradition of the First Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is full of nature spirituality, of earthen spirituality, and particularly focuses on the Psalms, which Christians, of course, pray with you, and is the source of our liturgical life. These are the prayers that we pray. And so Francis is throwing a new light on all of that. But Francis, in that chapter, wants to say that it's interesting, we are not beginning with the gospel of Jesus, per se, even though certainly in that chapter, Jesus is illuminated as such a nature mystic. And so we remember the ways that Jesus invited us to look to the lilies of the field and to see the birds of the air and understand the enormous providence of the Creator. We are reminded that when we speak of incarnation, for those of us who are Catholic, we say this means divinity lives within every atomic facet of this universe. And we say that creation is not something that God does outside of God's self, but rather God is almost like well, is like a womb, birthing creation and continuously birthing creation. So there's a lot of shifts going on there. And I just recommend that you find it. You can find it, you just go laudatosi.com, and you can find chapter 2. It's a beautiful chapter.
I thought it was laudatosi.vatican.va.
She's absolutely right.
This question, I think, is best appropriate to be directed to the rabbi. We see a lot of climate change. We see a lot of issues with forest fires and floods. Things that scientists tell us, we have to think about sustainability in how we build. At the same time, at least for the Jewish faith, there is a large segment of our population that is growing very rapidly. And in that case, sustainability, is taking a back seat towards another biblical concept of, have as many kids as you can. And also, going back to Genesis 1, at least I keep hearing, they say, well, the earth was put there for us. So why do we care about conserving water? Why do we care about trees? The trees were created for us to cut down. The water was there for us to drink. The fish was there for us to eat. So why not do these things? And it's very difficult to argue with anyone who would think that, because it's just a different matter of values, a different matter of priorities that people grow up with. So have you ever had to deal with those direct challenges, and how have you done so?
My sense is that the first part of the question was about population growth. The second part of the question is, doesn't Genesis 1 give us permission to do with the world as we wish? Yeah? So starting with the second question first, that's precise. Your critique, which is absolutely accurate, Lynn White Jr. in 1967 or 68 wrote a critique of the Western world, saying that we were responsible for sort of degrading the entire the environment, and why are we doing that? Because of Genesis 1. So there was so for decades the Judeo-Christian tradition has been blamed by many as the core reason for why the world is in the condition that it is, because our myth said we can do with the world whatever it is that we want. And people were trying to apologize for Genesis 1 and say, well, that's not really what it meant. What it really meant is dominion in the way that God would be someone who would rule the earth, because we're made in God's image, and that means we would be caring for the earth and we would be responsible for the earth. And I argued that for many years too. But I thought that that was not quite convincing, and I thought it was not honest to the text. I really did believe that the text was saying, in Genesis 1, we have the obligation to survive, and our survival means that we need to have dominion over the earth. But, and this is huge but, I think that was true only for the pre-industrial age, when we were not geophysical forces, when we could not, with our technology and our capacity, destroy the entire world. And I think that it was a blessing when you are so weak and so vulnerable and so small, and the earth is so big. It was in fact a blessing for us to be able to manage, to do agriculture, right? To dam up the rivers, to be able to fish, and to do agriculture and all the rest. So that was a blessing. But we have overstepped that blessing now. We have filled the earth. We have dominated the earth beyond the capacity that the earth can manage. And we are now, that's my whole argument, have to move to Genesis 2, when there are limits. And we must understand that we have an obligation to tend to the earth. In Genesis 1, the earth tended to us. In Genesis 2, we now, because of our strength, technological strength, have to tend toward the earth. And that does mean that we have to do this radical shift in our mindset. What was the phrase that you used?
Ecological conversion.
Ecological conversion. We need to make an ecological conversion. So that's an answer to your second question. First question is a very complicated question for Jews. It's very complicated. And many people say, well, it's not the amount of people that are in the world, it's the footprint of the people who are in the world. And there's some truth to that. So we don't have to worry so much about population control. We just have to worry about our appetites and our consumption. And especially for Jews who are still in the shadow of the Holocaust, having lost so many people, it's very hard for the Jewish community to say, we are so small as it is, 12 million maybe in the world. We're so small as it is, and we lost so many. Do we really have to hold back on having children? And it is a question that I have not yet come to a resolution on. I think everyone has to struggle with that for themselves.
That the role of man was to till the Garden of Eden, correct?
So the question is there a way to blend Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? I think that, in fact, that phrase in Genesis 2, which says the human was put in the garden, le'ovda u'l'shamra, does that, not in a way of domination, but in a way of proper usage. Le'ovda means to work the earth. And as others will tell you as well, le'ovda also is the same word, that word for work, is the same word that the Bible uses for meaning service to God. So when you brought your sacrifices to the temple, and you offered the sacrifices, that was an avodah, that was work, just like when you work the earth. So that Genesis 2 is saying working the earth is a sacred task, which means you have a right to work the earth. We have a right to do mining. We have a right to do agriculture. We have a right to cut down trees and build buildings. But we can only do it in a way that Lishamra protects the earth as well, guards the earth, does it in a sustainable way. Sustainable development says we cannot consume faster than the earth can produce, and we cannot create waste, which we shouldn't do anyway, but we cannot create things that will become waste faster than the earth can reabsorb it. And I think that's what Genesis 2 says. So I wouldn't use the word dominion in there, but proper use, full use. It's not a sin to create a building like this, right? But you can only create a building like this and not sin if you do it in a sustainable way, not pulling out of the earth more than the earth can regenerate itself, faster than the earth can regenerate itself, and not create waste faster than the earth can reabsorb it. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
May I jump on that question as well? Thank you, Rabbi. You know, as I was saying before, at least from the Catholic perspective, the teaching develops. So we have sensitivities now that we didn't have before. We have sensitivities now because we have gone over the limit. And in the introduction to the document, Francis wants to speak about the anguish of our Mother Earth, who has been so violated and exhausted by human use and abuse. And he wants to say that it is urgent now that we really transform our whole human operation, our way of being human on this earth, our life practice up until this moment, well, perhaps, you know, over especially the last 200 or 300 years of technological industrialization and the like, has really undercut the vitality and the sustainability of the planet. The mother will not live to be exhausted and exploited as we have been doing these past centuries. So I think that it's wiser for us to really sober up in terms of what we are being asked to do. And it is to be human in a new way. It is to be human from the heart of the earth, not being human above the earth, but somehow to understand that earth is a living being, and we are her celebrants, and we are, at this stage, we are her nurses and her hospice workers. And it's very important, I think, that we not try to buy it back somehow, or, negotiate it back, that freedom to have dominion.
Thank you very much, and both of you have been so eloquent and so inspiring.
The question has to do with how do these two beautiful teachings that we've heard this evening are so inspiring, and yet simply to hear them does not necessarily mean that they will be lived or acted upon. In other words, how shall our communities foster living into these new understandings of our true relationship to the natural world? So I would like to just say that when, as Rabbi Nina said, what was that phrase, ecological conversion? You know, you don't get converted by reading a document. You get converted somehow by doing the hard work of facing oneself, of coming to know oneself, of coming to witness oneself in one's daily life and practices, in one's thinking, in the inner domain, you know. When my colleague in the Berry Forum and I do programs such as this, I like to speak about three what I call koans that Father Thomas Berry gave us. The first being, is my next thought, word, or deed an act of sustainability for the earth? Is it sustainable, this next thought, word, or deed? In other words, can I keep doing it? Can we keep doing it? The second one was, is my next thought, word, or deed an act of intimacy with the living word, with the living world? Because the document by Francis and also the teaching of Thomas Berry is that we will not save what we do not love. And if we do not fall in love with our creatures and our streams and our trees and our bees as much as we love our cell phones and our laptops and all the other technological stuff that we have, we will not save it. And the third one is my next thought, word, or deed an act of celebration of the natural world? So the transformation is going to take a long time. It took us centuries to build this world, this dream world, which has turned into a nightmare. It's going to take years and decades to dream a new world, but we've got to start dreaming. The fourth koan, I think, is my next thought, word, or deed an act of solidarity with the poor, the ones who are getting hit first and worst by this disruption that we are in?
It is hard not to despair. It is hard not to despair. But here's the thing. If we despair and give up, we're guaranteed to not win what we have to win. The only way we're going to win, the only way we're going to create a world that is once again sustainable and doesn't wake us up at night in terror because we're not doing the right thing, is by trying to do the right thing. So we just got to keep going and keep trying and figure out all different ways to do it. One is to be inspired by what you just said. So a couple things that I will add to that. I just was in Annapolis, which is the state capital of Maryland, trying to get a bill through, and we had a hearing, and we had 50 high schoolers come with us to this hearing, and the youth get it. They get it. If we, the gray hairs, not just get out of the way and let the youth sort of guide the way, we will get there. The question is, can we get there fast enough? Because they can't grow up any faster than they can grow up, but they get it. We don't have centuries. I know that, I believe it will be before a century. I think before the end of this century, we will begin to have that ecological conversion. In the meantime, we just have to work very hard. The youth will inspire us. Two, We don't have to win over everybody's hearts and minds. What we have to do is build the systems so that when you go to the store, you can only buy things that have been created sustainably and can, at the end of their life, be renewed, and reused. We have to create systems where the energy, when you flick on a light, it automatically is, renewable energy. We have to create the systems so that even if you don't care about the climate, even if you don't believe in climate change, it doesn't make a difference, because what you are doing is supportive of sustainability, because the systems are in place, and we don't need more than 20% of the people. That's always the rule. 20% of the people can make a revolution. We only need 20% of the people to do that. And third, you can't get individual institutions to make changes unless there's somebody holding a portfolio to make that change. My husband and I just wrote a tshuva, which is a rabbinic responsum for the conservative movement that says what we have to do to live sustainable lives. And with all of the wonderful Genesis 1, Genesis 2, and all the other laws, the bottom line is we say, truly, every synagogue, every institution, every Jewish camp, every seminary has to have a person who holds the sustainability portfolio, either on the board or on the staff. Because if they don't, the institutions just won't get the job done. And if you've got somebody who keeps banging the table, and at every board meeting, just like for financial reports, every board meeting you say, what sort of green have we done today? Where do we stand on this, right? And if you've got somebody holding the institution's feet to the fire, it will happen. If not, it'll just be something that is nice.
Maya has all this hatred, and some of it started to arise again with Nazism in this country, which I couldn't believe.
Thank you, Gerard. The question really has to do with the overwhelming, the magnitude of what are experienced as the forces of evil by any other name, and how do we meet those forces, and why are they rising, it seems, so much in our day. So I think we both probably have ways of trying to address this. I just want to say, Gerard, that I think the one, I know it's a cliche, but I think that the Redeemer, the Redeemer we're waiting for is right here. This is the community of redemption in this Jewish Catholic community that we have assembled here together. We share that understanding that it is our work to transform human history, and to do that, I think that each and every single one of us has to understand that this is a critical moment. I think maybe we got a little bit, how do I want to say, leisurely in the last few decades about the world, about economic injustice, about racism, about anti-Semitism, about these many things that are, the multiple heads of this hydra that we seem to spawn as human beings when we're not living in the light and living in the depth of our true nature. So I don't think there's an easy answer. I think the answer is in this room. I think it's what we're trying to do here. I think it's trying to live in a new light, by new lights, with new wisdom, and keep working it.
But to actually go to each church, each synagogue, and say, are you doing X, Y, Z?
The question is, are there ways and are there initiatives that are encouraging and, in fact, following up with churches, synagogues, institutions to actually do the sustainability work that needs to get done? From the Jewish tradition, yes and no. So first of all, there's Green Faith, which we alluded to before, which is an organization that encourages leaders from various faith traditions to come and be trained as a Green Faith leader and then go back to their congregations and their communities and make sure that the sustainability work gets done. So that's out there. In the reform movement, there is a national organization that advocates for federal legislation on sustainability. There's not something that you're talking about which sort of goes around to the congregations. The tshuva that my husband and I just wrote does ask that we do that. And we're working now with the conservative movement to create a structure where we can, in fact, do that, lay out the framework for what should be done in the various, as again, institutions, and have people claim that responsibility within each institution and have a national desk that will work with them. That takes money, and we have to be able to raise the money to be able to do that. Absent that, I know that there's a new organization called J-Tree, which is encouraging the Jewish community to plant 1 million trees, around the world. There's an organization now birthing called Dayenu, which is about, again, federal regulations and legislation. So there are organizations that promoting sustainability, but not exactly the way you want to, but that's what I'm hoping that my husband's and my tshuva can help us do within the conservative movement.
In the Catholic community, and I'm going to just ask my colleague to help me on this, but for example, one could commit to and sign the Laudato Pledge, which would be a way of committing and really making that step to commit to this personal ecological conversion, and also to engage with others in other communities. There's also the Catholic Climate Covenant, which, is that what I just said? No. The Catholic Climate Covenant is happening in parishes and faith communities all around. But I think, as Rabbi Nina says, it really requires someone who has got passion in place to lead that movement for transformation. There are lots and lots of things that are available in the Catholic world, but again, I feel that there needs to be an animator. Brother Kevin, can you say something more about that? This is Brother Kevin Cawley. He's the director of the Thomas Berry Forum here at Iona, and he is someone who is very engaged with the New York metro communities.
Thank you. Thank you both for helping us open up this question. And I'll say briefly that the Thomas Berry Forum at Iona is working on this question. Sister Kathleen and I have been moving around talking about Laudato, and we've been to a lot of church basements. That's where it's happening. We're not waiting for the enlightened thought of some of our leadership, particularly among the Catholic hierarchy. They're very distracted. They're busy about many things. It's not their fault. It's just that's where they are. But we are busy about this, and we certainly, with Green Faith and a number of our colleagues, and certainly thank you for Larry Troster's shout out tonight, a great friend of this work, are aware of it. And the Catholic Church is working on it from Laudato perspective, and they're each year now celebrating Laudato's anniversary. This will be the 5th anniversary coming up. And they're moving around the planet with celebrations in different parts of the world each year to commemorate. So the 6th anniversary will be in Portugal at the World Youth Day, and the 7th will be somewhere else, and the 8th will be in Asia, and the 9th will be in Oceania, and the 10th will be back in Rome. They're constantly bringing this question in front of us. So we know that there's an effort to bring it forward, and I agree that it's not the work of weeks or months or even years, but probably decades at least. And long after the people that are up here are gone, the people in those seats will be doing the work. Please God.
He gave us the earth to take the trees or to survive off the trees, pass in the air,
So, what a wonderful question. Are we overstepping ourselves in all of the ways that we know the human has excelled, so to speak? Could you reflect on that for us? What do you think? He's one of my scholars. I know he's so smart. Could you? What do you think?
I'd say that I'm saying this because what you've taught us today of God giving us this earth to survive and use it to how we must to survive and use it to master what God's given us, it just seems that we're doing things that would never happen in the natural world. And it seems like we're beginning to overstep and going further beyond than what we should, almost as if we are playing God in our own way. We're doing biology, we're changing what foods taste like, we're changing what they look like, we're chasing after a thing called the God particle that we should probably have never known of. We're going on the moon, we're going to space. This is something that would never happen naturally. So I'm just curious.
So this young scholar is in our Story of the Universe class. It's a course in sacred cosmology. And if I could it's a very, very deep question. It's the one that we're spending 3 months on, right? Because our challenge in our class is to ask the deep question, what is a cosmic person? So I think that, you know what I want to say? I think it's marvelous that we're out in space. I think it's marvelous that we are researching that old Higgs boson and all of those magical, wonderful scientific things, because, you know, as Einstein said, his great desire was to know the mind of God. That's all he was interested in. So, in a way, you know, science is the new mysticism of our era. And it is the way to be exploring into God, so to speak, into the creativity of Creator. So I want to say that the dilemma is hubris. It's haughtiness. It's really, it's mistaking our vocation to be co-creators with the living God, to be collaborators, co-workers with the living God. Because I think maybe one of Rabbi Nina's beautiful slides that we didn't get to, it said, destroy nothing. And also in Laudato, you know, there is a challenge from the scripture that says, where would we be? Where would we be by ourselves? Everything is funded by this divine life and this divine energy. The humility, the awe, the gratitude, the cultivation of those energies and dispositions and mind states could keep us from being destructive and not curtail us from being creative. Because it is our great blessing to enter into the creativity of the universe. So how do we do it humbly? That's the question, I think.
Amen. That was great, and I would say in just in like 6 words or so. The intelligence and the imagination of humanity are also gifts from God. And we have, in a sense, the obligation to exercise them as much as we can. But we have to do it humbly and know when we might be overstepping our bounds. But never underestimate the blessing of our intelligence and imagination and the power that we have to use it and the right that we have to use it. But thank you for the question. May I end with a prayer? This is extremely immodest, but my husband and I ended the tshuva that we wrote with the prayer because we didn't think, in all the richness of the Jewish prayer book, that we had a prayer that exactly said what we wanted to say about our deep relationship and responsibility to the earth. So we wrote a prayer. In Hebrew, I'll read it in English, except for the first few words. The first few words are Ribono Shel Olam, which means, God of the universe. Ribono Shel Olam. It's also the way that Jews have approached God in a very intimate way. Ribono Shel Olam. Ribono Shel Olam is the way they would say it in Yiddish. This is like God who's very, very present to us. This is a very intimate approach to God. Everything you have made has a purpose. Air is for breathing, water for drinking and bathing, land for living and growing, plants and animals for your pleasure and humanity to work and care for your earth. Inspire us every day to care for your earth so that we may fulfill your vision, and it quotes Isaiah that we had in the beginning. Not as a wasteland did you create the earth, but as a home for habitation where we may live. Amen.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, Post Office Box 360, Stamford, Connecticut 06904. Or you can call the JBS Pledge Line at 833-MY-JBS-TV. That's 833-695-2788. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. We thank you for your kind support.